Hello and welcome to Leading Dragons podcast number 4. So today it's the 3rd of November 2020 and it's probably one of the most defining days in history with the US elections that are happening tonight. And it just got me thinking that more than ever before this year and as we're coming out towards the end of 2020, more and more people are looking for the truth. And we're trying to sort of figure out what is and what isn't the truth. So what is the truth around the leadership paradigm? What is the truth around organizational culture? And how do employers perceive their employees? And what is the truth around what needs to change? And given that we've got to start change from within. Anyway, so today we have a wonderful special guest, Suzie Lewis. Welcome to Leading Dragons.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, so Suzie, we'll dive in, shall we? And Suzie, you are passionate about connecting people. You're very much passionate around collaboration and inclusivity or inclusiveness. I don't know which one we say. What do we say? Inclusivity?
I don't know, but I know what you mean. Inclusiveness? Oh, I don't know.
Inclusiveness or diversity. Diversity.
Yeah.
Diversity in organizations.
Yeah.
You've worked at Airbus for 20 years. You also founded their Leadership University. And today you are the proud founder and managing director of your own company called Transform for Value. So Suzie, over to you. Tell us a little bit about what got you to leave the corporate world and dive into entrepreneurship.
Okay, well, first of all, Deborah, thanks for inviting me onto your show. I think it's really important to discuss these subjects. So let's go back to the truth. What is the truth about leadership and what is the truth about organizational culture? I stayed in corporate for 20 years. I had a great time. I made some brilliant changes. I met some fabulous people, and I miss that. But I decided to step out of corporate because I got stuck in that model, if you like. So my passion for connecting people, and I got curious. I got curious about what was happening in other industries, what was happening in other areas, and what I could do differently outside. And, you know, as with all organizations, you have a big system, which brings with it lots of opportunities, but also lots of constraints. So I got a little bit sick of the big machine, let's put it that way, and the constraints it put on the impact I wanted to have in the organization. So I took a leap of faith. I got to a stage where two things happened. One, I felt that my value proposition was bigger on the outside in terms of what I wanted to do for transformation. And two, it was the first time ever I asked myself, I questioned, can I move the needle here? Can I make the change I want to change in this culture? And that led me to think, okay, then it's now or never. I'm going to step out and I'm going to carry on doing what I'm massively passionate about, use all of the experience that I've got and the great things I've learned, and look at helping other organizations and other industries to do exactly the same thing. So that's why I stepped out of the organization. A big, scary step. At the time, it didn't feel scary because it felt so right. And everyone kept saying, oh, that's so courageous. Wow, you're leaving this organization. And I didn't see it like that, but I'm glad I didn't, because I think if I'd have thought about it, I might have been a little bit more scared than I was. But that's where the pride comes from now, of course, of being able to do what I do and have the impact I have that I had in the organization, but I'm now having it differently. So, and it's different to have your own business and to think, yep, this is going to be part of my legacy. So you make a legacy in organizations, of course, but it's not the same. So.
Yeah, and legacy is one of those words, isn't it? And it goes back to the purpose of Leading Dragons podcast, which is, you know, at the end of the day, we can choose what is the legacy that we want to leave behind. And it's down to each one of us. So, I mean, you know, 2 thumbs up for your courage in stepping out into the big bad world of entrepreneurship and out of the corporate world, which is sort of the safety zone, so to speak, but I'm doing it in inverted commas. And this is also why, you know, I chose to invite you as a dragon, because a dragon is a fearless leader. And we go back to, you know, why fearless? Because fear is what stifles us, essentially. And that's what keeps so many people doing the same old thing, you know, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, because we're just paralyzed with this fear. We're thinking we can't possibly stand up and speak up. We can't possibly step out of the box and challenge the status quo. So that's what we're here to do. Okay. So yeah, so going back to the truth, and also just listening to you, Suzie, you know, I can see that you said it just felt so right stepping out of Airbus after 20 years. And I could just feel that you just felt that you also in alignment, and you are in alignment with your authenticity, which is your truth. So it makes sense to you, and it was the natural step for you to take in your career and in your life.
Completely. And it doesn't mean it was easy, but it felt natural at the time. And I've been on a massive, massive learning curve, which is what I wanted. I don't think I asked myself that question enough when I was in what I'm going to call the corporate box, around how fearless am I being and how true am I being to myself as a leader, but also to what I want to spread collectively and put into the organizational culture. I like to talk about opening up organizational cultures. And that's about, I'm a firm believer in the fact that you can have an organizational culture based on courage and not fear, but it looks very different. And it's scarier, of course, and more vulnerable. And there I'm talking about individual vulnerability, but also collective vulnerability. And when you first asked me to come on the podcast, I was thrilled, obviously, but I was also thrilled because of the dragon analogy. And I love this dragon thing because a dragon's about power, but not just ego. So, of course, you have to keep that in check, and that's a constant battle for everybody. And I think it's a collective battle in organizations in terms of how ego-driven the culture is. But, you know, in the totem spirit world, the dragon is about power, but also the power of being kind, and what you can get from self-acceptance and what you can give out of service. So the dragon is a great analogy for me in terms of what exists in organizations and how they drive their results, but also what's needed in terms of a truer form of leadership, which is, of course, being pushed by digital. Enabled, I think, maybe a different word, but for the moment it's being pushed into the culture. But we need more dragons, clearly. And I used to say to myself, I challenge the status quo, I get up, I'm a change maker. And that was true, Debs, but now I'm out of there, because I always said to myself, I'm a challenger, I challenge the status quo. I didn't realize how formatted I was by the culture until I stepped out. And that's been a really big learning for me. And it's made me redefine my dragon, let's put it that way.
And you talked about, you know, fear and courage. And when we look at the spectrum, at the end of the day, there are, at both ends of the spectrum, you have fear on one end and you have love, ultimately, love on the other end. And so how are each one of us making our own decisions? Are they fear-based decisions, or are they courage, you know, love-based decisions? And then you talked about the ego, and how, you see, we're going straight into spiritual stuff now, aren't we? and how the ego is actually over there, isn't it, with fear, and individual competition and power and control. Whereas if we started making decisions starting within ourselves, from a place of love and courage, the world would look totally different. I'm going to, from there, I'd like to go straight into my next question to you, which is, do you believe that the traditional paradigm of leadership is broken? And if so, why?
Well, yes, is the short answer to that question. And I think it's broken for the reason we've just sort of touched upon, which is, one of my favorite discussions is ego to eco. I even thought about calling my company Ego to Eco, and it's one of my, anybody who's listening who knows me will be smiling because that's the phrase I always use. But for me, that is the pivot of what's happening in today's society, organization, economic models, communities, but also in organizational culture. So the leadership paradigm is broken for me for two reasons. One, because the world is constantly evolving. So that's sort of different generations, which bring with them a different context. And, the evolution of how we think about the workplace and work, and also digital, which has changed the rules of the game in terms of how you need to work and how people are connected technologically, but also from a human perspective. And COVID has just come and forced us into a place, all of us, irrespective of where you work, where we need to be ready to work and think differently. And therefore, we need to be led differently. So there's lots of discussions around how leaders need to be different. And I can throw out all the words empathy, curiosity, coach, leader as coach. But essentially, we're moving from this paradigm of ego to a paradigm of eco, which means that, the Joseph Campbell's hero leadership needs now to be a more interdependent leadership. And that's quite easy to say. But if you look at everything that's held in there around managing your own ego, looking at boundaries, understanding your team, understanding what it means to let go and let your team actually be empowered enough to take those decisions, that's a massive shift from traditional management models and also from organizational governance. And this is why, I work a lot with agile. So agile with a big A, for me, is these hard questions that are on the top table of every organization, which is the governance, the processes and the operating models of organizations that want to work in a more agile way. What does that mean for processes, ways of working, but also for individual identities and status within the organization? So we're back to the ego discussion, and that move from individual to collective is why the leadership paradigm is broken, but it's not shattered. It's just got a few pieces missing and it's clunky. So I think, yes, we need to turn the paradigm on its head, but I think with what's coming in terms of generational context and the way people, particularly after COVID, are thinking about purpose, and why they're there, and are they valued in their team, and what are they there to do? All this is coming to the fore, and you'll get a grassroots momentum from the organizations that are still set up in pyramids, that for a move to a more collaborative, networked way of working. We're seeing it in political institutions, we're seeing it in economic models. There's no reason why organizations should be that different. My one hope in terms of truth and legacy is that organizations will take the time to step back and understand the lessons from COVID and what that means for the way they manage their employees and the way they manage the way their organization works.
And this move brings us into the realm of change. And I can't remember who said it. They said, it was that the only constant in life is change. And yet we're crap at it. We're social animals that resist change. It's that sort of knee-jerk reaction, and it's overcoming that. And just like yourself, working inside corporations, trying to move that dial, shift perceptions, shift perspectives on things. It's huge. It's like sort of you got a huge tank, but even if we could just do that 1 degree shift. Yeah. And whilst we talk about long-lasting change, at the end of the day, there's a lot of effort put into that. But if at the end of the day you're doing it within a bubble and people are working in silos, all that effort was in vain, because it's just going to be diluted and back into the bigger system. Suzie, let's go back into those beautiful corporate days at Airbus, and I'd love to hear from you what your biggest organizational feat was as an Airbus employee.
Oh, that's a really hard question, but I think it's always linked to my ambition. So I had this vision, and I still have it, around collective intelligence and what human systems are capable of. And I'm stuck now between two examples, but let's take them both because they're both showing the same thing, but a little bit differently. So co-founding the university was brilliant. It was huge. It was complex. It was also a change in paradigm in terms of ways of working, in terms of how we organize things, in terms of the way people learn. But it was also a platform, creating a platform for networked ways of working. and changing the hypothesis that leadership isn't about your level of the organization. And this is one of my favorite subjects because I feel so strong that leadership is about impact. And if you take that hypothesis, everyone's a leader. And in there you have experts, thought leaders, community leaders, team leaders, etc. So that opens a whole new range of possibilities, not only for learning and for impacting the organization, but also for the unwritten codes of organizational culture and how they define talent and potential. Because I feel, and this is why I feel so strongly about what I do, is that there is so much potential sitting in organizations that is hidden in inverted commas because it doesn't fit into a box or a system that we've defined. So opening that box was great. It was an organizational feat because we brought so many people together from so many existing structures and we created a new ambition and a new reality. We had to build it. We had to get over individual fears, collective fears. We had to get to know each other. And then we had to put ourselves at the service of the organization with a different paradigm, with a paradigm of, you know, let's take the 70-20-10 model and let's learn on the job. And if it's not perfect, it doesn't matter. Let's get into that iterative loop of failure is a lever for learning. So that was a massive organizational feat for me, of which I'm massively proud. And it was one of my first collective management experiences, which was brilliant. That was diversity of perspective and inclusion in action. And it was based on respect. And it's a proud moment for me every time I think about it, of what we achieved in such a short time with so many different constraints and opportunities. There were people who didn't want us to do it. There were people who actively didn't want us to do it. And then there were lots of people who were happy to see what went on. And then lots of people who actively wanted us to do it. And that is a great mix because you never get 100% unanimity. And who would want 100% unanimity? That isn't what inclusion is about. Inclusion is about accepting different perspectives and using them to get something different and richer for the organization. So that was a big, proud moment for me, individually, but also collectively. And the other one was setting up an inclusive employee resource group, which started from federating women's networks, which brought together approximately 900 people, up to creating a huge company-wide 12,000 member strong network, essentially a platform for change. So that was the same. People were telling me it wouldn't work. Not everyone was convinced. Not everyone wanted to. But there were enough people excited and courageous enough to get around the table and say, right, let's do this. And my vision was for it to grow and grow and grow and to add value to the organization. And that's what happened. So yeah, they're my two fond memories of me playing out my vision, but also an ambition for the organization where the collective potential was brought to the service of the organization.
Wow, that two beautiful stories, success stories.
Yeah, yeah.
And I love how the way that you tell the story is that you were inviting that adversity because you took it on as like, okay, so it's challenging me to be better, for us collectively to be better and to really step up into our game. And so you were playing with that adversity as well as those who are the standers by and those who are totally on board with you. And so even, and it's a fundamental value of yours, which is that diversity, because at the end of the day, you're aware of how much it brought to you and served you.
Yeah, and it's hard. But I think, comfort and growth don't coexist, do they? And I think you always owe it to yourself and particularly to others to ask yourself if you're right. That question of where could I be wrong is massively powerful. And I'm a particularly action-biased person. So in a fast-paced delivery environment, I'm in my element. I love it. Let's do this. Let's do that. Give me this. Give me that. But, learning to take a step back and thinking, okay, if I just stop delivering and I go against my action-biased tendency, what else could be out there and what else could be right? It's not just about getting things done. It's about doing them in a way that is right for everyone. And that's a very different paradigm from deliver.
Yeah, just ticking the boxes, right? So
Yeah.
just listening to you, I consider you already pretty fearless. Was there a time? Was there a time during your 20 years there in your corporate career where you experienced fear, and how did you overcome it?
So yes, definitely is the answer to that. I think it sounds fearless now with hindsight, and it was fearless, but I didn't feel fearless. Let's put it that way. I think there's always individual fears. There's always individual fears of, will it be accepted by the system? Will I lose my identity in the system? What will people think of it? Will they want to help me take it forward? And all those fears are also collective. Because if you look at, and it can be as simple as, let's take a pilot for empowered organizations and change everybody's title so that everyone has the same title. So therefore, when you say who you are, there's no longer an indication of which level of the organization you're at and where you sit. And, and that is practicing what we preach. So there's always fear in that because you're navigating the unknown. And collective fear, I think, can be very positive in terms of momentum. I did have an individual fear of, will I be up to the mark? Will I be able to lead this vision and take people with me? Because otherwise it's just the Suzie show, and that's not the point, and it's not interesting. Can we take this to somewhere where it can enable and empower the organization to work differently? So that I did lose sleep over those things, but not enough not to do it. So there were days when I had to convince myself, not that I was right, but that I could find enough resilience to go back in and do it differently.
And isn't that the real definition of what a leader is? It's not about knowing, having all the answers, but it's still getting up the next day and keeping hold of that vision and moving forward. And tripping over, I mean, God, at the end of the day, we're human beings, right? I mean, we make mistakes, and it's not about that. It's about the vision that we hold, the commitment that we have towards our team and ourselves, and towards the vision.
Yeah, I think it's about developing your people so that they come with you on your vision, but also that they do it better and differently than you could ever have done it. And that's leadership, is taking people with you on a common cause. And it has to be bigger than you. It has to be bigger than your team. It has to be, a more holistic vision. I have a dear friend who always talks about the created future. And as opposed to working from the past, yes, you need to stay in the present, but you need to work from the created future. So looking back, looking at what the opportunities are and how we can get there. So, I suppose I use a lot of design thinking, and it's the difference cognitively between the yes, but and the yes, and. And I'm a big advocate of yes, and we'll see if it works. So, yeah, I think that's what leadership's about. And it's not easy and it's scary, but courage has to overtake the fear.
Yeah, and that is just that, isn't it? So if at the end of the day, you're leveraging the collective, then you're all in it together. There is no hierarchical dynamic going on, but it's like, hey, we're a team with a common goal. Let's go. Let's do the best that we can.
Yeah.
And but this requires shift in mindset, shift in perception. And do you honestly believe that companies today, organizations, are ready to make that change?
As organizations, no. No. No, for two reasons. I think we need to split it into the being and the doing. So they're more ready in the doing than they are in the being, of course. We're back to the fast-paced delivery discussion. But if you just do without ever thinking about the being, you don't ever get to the understanding of what environment are you creating for that change to be sustainable and for it to actually change the ways of working and the way the organization thinks, acts, and interacts. Now, I'm talking about organizations, but clearly it's people. So I think there are a lot of people in those organizations who are massively ready. And I love going to find those people, because you can create communities of courage, but also excitement and movement and innovation, essentially, which and you can create a voice in the system that starts to be heard. And I think, the deep democracy of any system is hearing all voices, including voices that don't fit into any boxes. And they are often the voices that bring the most, the truest things to the table. So I think organizations are not ready as a whole because, to come back to our earlier discussion, the processes, the governance, the ways of working, they're not ready. It isn't rewarded and it isn't recognized by the system. That isn't the way the system works today. That doesn't mean it can't work like that tomorrow. And I'm a massive advocate of, you know, nothing is impossible. Clearly nothing is impossible. And if you surround yourself with the right people, not the right people in terms of who you're meant to be seen with, but the right people in terms of people who are on the same journey as you in terms of ambition. And that doesn't mean they're the same. In fact, I would hope they were very different because then you can get the richness of what those people bring to the table, those different perspectives. But
diversity again.
Yeah, of course. But so the being, companies aren't ready. And the doing, they're ready to do, but you need to do the being before you can understand how to do what that being is asking you to do differently.
Yeah. And as long as companies have bottom line basis for decisions, that nothing is going to change. And this is when we go back to the tick the box initiatives. Yeah. Tick the box, go on this management course, leadership course, get all your team out on an offsite for 3 or 5 days up in the mountains somewhere. It's just ticking those boxes, but then everyone just goes back to the work environment and just goes, oh, there we go, back on Monday and back to their comfort zone and what they're used to doing. And so what paradigm is broken? Nothing has. You know, it's been however energizing that offsite was, or that workshop was, or the facilitators were, and whatever, you know, exciting, igniting discussions you've had. You know, then typically, you know, we go back to work, back into that work environment, and I'd like to move on to that because at the end of the day, culture is a living and breathing entity in itself. So we have everybody. You know, let's imagine an organization with 200 people, which is a small organization, and then you have, you've got 201. Because you've got the culture, and you know how, and I'd like to move into that because you as a change catalyst and a digital expert that you are, a lot of companies more and more talking about going digital. So just going back, let's just pause there for a minute. So, you know, is this just a buzzword, or why is it more and more organizations are looking to go digital and be digital?
So yes, it's a buzzword in the same way that agile or culture change is a buzzword for me. So, which means organizations know they need to do it. They need to do something on that subject. I think the really interesting discussion is, what does going digital mean? Does it mean pouring everything you've got onto a platform? Does it mean buying more online collaborative tools so that we can collaborate more? Does it mean looking at new business models? Does it mean setting up an innovation lab as a satellite structure? I mean, what does going digital mean? And for me, we're back to the original discussion of going digital means creating a culture where what digital enables can thrive. So the interconnected space requires a different type of leadership, a different culture, and a different way of working. That is going digital for me. And
Suzie, could you give us could you illustrate that with an example?
Yeah, so for example, going digital, let's take, we've just onboarded Microsoft Teams. We've equipped everyone with Microsoft Teams and all the collaborative things that you have in the Microsoft suite. So we're digital. Okay, I've ticked a box, we're digital. And then we haven't looked at our processes, we haven't looked at new business models, we haven't looked at what's going on in the competitor landscape or creating ecosystems. We're still working in silos where procurement doesn't share their budget with finance, who doesn't share their budget with operations, and that's your territory and this is my territory. So, but there are digital tools in there. There may even be digital platforms. But what digital platforms bring are ecosystems, an ecosystem way of thinking. So if I look at creating a platform, it changes the way you have to view data. So you get data-driven ways of working, where data comes out of a machine, so you can no longer have it sent to your boss before it's sent to the top. It just comes out of a machine and gives you insights that you never had before, but you have to understand what's in there. So in terms of decision making and accountability, it changes the landscape, this data-driven way of working, which is often driven by big data, but through structures like platforms. And then you have to look at, for me, the big thing around platform business models or structures is that you move from ownership to sharing. And this is exactly what's happening with data and partnership. So, you can't just say, I'm the supplier, you're the client. It's now about how can we work together in partnership? How can I be transparent with my data? Our data is now in the same system. What does that mean for us, the way we buy, the way we sell, the way we do maintenance? So there are lots of things in there that means that you have to cope with multiple perspectives, multiple business models, and you are a partner, not a head of a territory. Yeah. Putting my words on it, but this is the big shift in data-driven ways of working and user centricity, whether it's the customer or the employee or the user, if it's an application. What does that experience look like? And gone are the days when you can just hold it in a silo, because it's like, gone are the days when talent was just a HR job. Skills, talent is now, an organization-wide responsibility for me, particularly for leaders. And that shift can seem quite implicit, but it needs to be made explicit. And it's about creating value differently, going digital. And so you have to have the value creation, understanding, and then the discussion around what does that mean, not only for business models, what's it mean for the way we reward our employees, the way we deal with our customers, and the way we partner with our supply chain.
So wow, there are lots of valuable.
I'm on the roll.
Nuggets. It's like, woo, okay, which one? Where should I go? I'll just pick this one. But one thing that one piece that you mentioned, which is so key. You said, yeah, so going digital and shifting the ways of working so they become data driven. It also implies a shift from ownership to sharing. So from being, from top-down control to partnership. And so looking at that, it's to me, it's accountability, and it's sharing accountability. So and this brings me back to performance management systems. Yeah, it's like if you've got your appraisal at the end of the year, and you're going to be evaluated according to how you as an individual in that company, in that department, say HR for instance, how you've achieved your objectives, until that prevails, that performance management system. So this is also a paradigm in itself, right? How can anything shift? How can, you can put the latest technological platforms out there. You can have the latest digital, whatever, snazzy tools out there. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the environment and the system is not, then the system cannot possibly support that and actually drive that shift. And that we won't move from ownership to sharing, from top-down control to partnership and accountability.
Yeah, and if we just define digital as having an app or a chatbot, or that is for me missing the point. I mean, clearly they're digital tools, but unless you help your organization understand what it changes in terms of, you're right, accountability, empowerment, and collective responsibility, then you're never going to change the system. So if I come back to one of our first discussions, the big machine, you're not going to change the big machine. So digital tools just get lost in there, and they lose all the opportunities they're bringing for different types of collaboration. But for that to happen, we go back to the leadership truth. You have to be able to let go of your data and let go of your people and empower them and give them accountability to take decisions on data that you haven't seen yet, that's coming out of a machine, but you trust that that data is right because you've built the algorithms and done the machine learning in order for the machine to learn what you want it to learn to produce the right data, which will give you different insights. So I think, I hear a lot about data savvy leaders. Leaders need to get data savvy. Yes, they do. But they also need to, there's a different layer under that for me of what does being data savvy mean for the human system? What does it mean around the way you do systemic leadership or the way you manage yourself and the system. For me, in human systems, in any systems, there's always the I and the we element, ego and eco. How do I react? How do I manage what's happening inside out and then outside in? So therefore, what does it mean for the collective? And then how do I bring it back into that cycle of the way I manage things? And on an organizational level, that's what's happening in terms of data driven. It's around changing the whole system. So just one person being courageous, you need to start a movement. And they are easy to start. There are lots of people who want to do things differently and who are courageous enough to get up and get their voice heard in the system. It's just about turning the volume up, let's put it that way.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. No. So when we talk about boosting performance, we can't just take digital and go, right, okay, so that's on the agenda of 2021, but always have the underlying, how should I call it, the foundation, which is, okay, so maybe we need to look at our culture. We maybe need to look at the work environment, the ways that we're working currently. And typically, the bigger the company, the bigger the matrix. The bigger the matrix, the more layers of governance. The more layers of governance, the slower things get done. Mm. And so by the time it gets to the exco table, whatever, it's like, it's right down at the bottom, item number 32. And so, and at that point, people, because those who submitted the idea or the proposal have kind of moved on. What do you believe, Suzie? So ultimately, each one of us, as employees in organizations, we need to be rethinking individually and collectively in the way that things are done within our circle of influence, although we could also challenge beyond that as well. So what do you believe is the fundamental that we each can do to start making that shift happen?
I think there are two things. It's understanding yourself. So understanding what's happening inside and where your accountability lies. Because for me, everybody is responsible for that in a system, irrespective of where you sit, who your boss is, how long you've been there. There is an individual responsibility to enact the change and to challenge the status quo, or to move things forward if you're happy with the status quo. But I would still think that you have to question it regularly. So one, understanding where your accountability is and how you want to use it, because we are all leaders, and I wholly believe that. And just because you're only one voice, the second part of my call to action, if you like, is dare to speak up, dare to put your voice out there. How many people told me, oh, it won't work, oh, this is, no one will ever listen to you. Okay, I chose to rise above that because I felt that it was what was needed. And I found lots of people very quickly who wanted to do the same thing, maybe differently, but who had the same calling in terms of creating collective. And I think we hear a lot today about collective objectives, but until they're a reality and they're run through the system and people can see those behaviors and collective objectives being rewarded and recognized and pushed through the system, people won't do it. That isn't a reason not to push that subject. So, and you don't have to be 100% passionate about something to go and voice what you think. And I just think everybody's voice is equal and is equally as important. It's not equal in the system, of course, because of the way the system is set up. But, a lot of the pyramid still exists. And like you say, the matrix organization for me was a compromise between the pyramid and a network. And now we're at the limits of what a matrix system can provide, because digital has enabled so much more interconnectedness, and COVID has just, like I say, forced us into a place where that matrix is stretched to its limits now. So it's now the truth moment. The watershed moment is now for how do we organize our organizations, and how do we work to keep competitive advantage, but also to take advantage of the enormous investment in human capital that we make, billions of euros and dollars in leadership development, in sort of design thinking training, in well-being, and they're all necessary. But training on its own, if you don't look at the culture and how you put it back into the machine, won't change a system. But everybody has the power to change a system. So that's my call to action. Even if you think you're not powerful, you are.
Yeah. and we each have a voice. And
Clearly.
a lot of us still have to find it in order
Yeah.
to speak up. Wow, okay, so I'm just thinking like where we're going to go from here, you know. I mean, there's so much to talk about. We're kind of being very succinct in the messages, but I'd like to, Suzie, thank you so much. I'd like to start wrapping up now, and I'm really, I mean, just listening to you, it's so inspiring, and I'd like to invite the listeners to. It's a question out there to everyone, which is, you know, how curious are we? How curious are we on a day-to-day basis, at work, like at home when we speak with our children? How curious are we? And can we catch ourselves waiting for the person opposite us to finish talking so that we can come up with like a smarter response or whatever? I mean, we've all been guilty of that. So,
Yeah.
you know, how curious can we get? And yeah, like you said, I think this pandemic has, I see it as well as I can't say, if I can say it, a blessing in disguise for us, each one of us, to slow right down and start to go, right, okay, so, you know, where am I today, you know, in my life? Where am I in terms of building my legacy? What is my legacy? You know, who am I really? What do I stand for? Do I want to continue the way things were before the pandemic, before the first lockdown? Or what is it that I want to change? And even just that shift in mindset is already the beginning of becoming more authentic. So, you know, Suzie, you talked about when you were stuck and how you became unstuck.
Yes.
We're all faced with adversity anyway. Yeah, always going to be criticized. You know, they're going to be constraints, and it goes back to, okay, so what is the legacy what is it that you really believe in? What is it that you want to fight for? And I think it's for each one of us to fight, just have that one fight. Fight is a different way of saying, you know, what is your calling? You Suzie, you like to use the word impact. What is the impact that you want to, what is your empreinte, your imprint that you want to leave? So this is a question to the listeners. So what resonated with you most with Suzie's sharing, and what insights and feelings have sparked throughout the conversations? And in organizations, we mentioned, I was thinking of low-hanging fruit. Yeah. So when you want to challenge a given status quo in the organization, you know, start speaking to people who you trust and see, okay, so who are the other, you know, low-hanging apples around me? And, you know, why not start create a little community? Because obviously united and collectively we're much more impactful than standing up on our own in front of a full army of adversity. So it's about finding our tribe, isn't it? And perhaps, dear listeners, you probably are a member of a community inside the organisation, or perhaps not, perhaps outside the organisation. Are you really taking full advantage of being that member in that community? Are you having the right conversations, or perhaps you could change those conversations and transform them to create that impact? So from here, collective objectives, self-awareness. What is the one action that you could commit yourself to do today? It will be a promise to yourself, and it's not to anyone else, because at the end of the day, this is each one of our career, and it's an expression of ourselves professionally. Okay, Suzie, thank you so much. It was lovely to have you, and all the very best with Transform for Value.
Thank you.
And let's keep making ripples.
Yeah, I'll be creating a bigger dragon.
Yay! Okay, bye.
Bye.